California Local Energy and Climate colleagues. I'm Angie Hacker, the statewide best practices coordinator here in California. This is a role that is ratepayer funded and ordered by the CPUC. It's administered by the Local Government Commission, ICLEI, and the Institute for Local Governments. And the goal is to advance and exchange knowledge amongst local governments pursuing local, state, and energy climate goals. One way I can do that is by talking directly with professionals throughout the state that can share firsthand on-the-ground experiences and best practices. So today, I'm really pleased to be coordinating my first online interview with local energy expert, Howard Choy. So welcome, Howard.
Thank you. Good to be here and see you again.
You too. So Howard has worked in the local energy and sustainability space for about 30 years, right?
About, yes.
About. And currently through his own consulting firm. Previously, he worked with LA County, the Los Angeles Water and Power Department, LAWDP, and as the chair of the local government Sustainable Energy Coalition. So Howard and I had actually met in 2009, and that was when we had hit an economic downturn across the country. And he and I were both beginning to work on our local government programs, both in LA County for Howard and me in Santa Barbara County. And we had begun to take advantage of some new policies in California to ramp up our energy programs. We know that local governments and energy sustainability professionals across the state are facing similar challenges now. And so we wanted to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about what may be coming with the economic fallout with COVID as it starts to hit local budgets that are already strained by some things that are happening at the state level, changes in ratepayer funding for energy programs and other changes. So we thought it'd be a good time to reflect back on how we navigated the local economic downturns that we faced the last round back in 2009, and how we took advantage of some unique opportunities, not just to survive or sustain our programs during that time, but to thrive by establishing programs that have since grown. So Howard, take us back to 2009 in LA County. What was it like at LA County as recession started to hit? And tell us a little bit about what parallels you see to the current crisis.
Sure. And I can even go back before 08. I was at the county during the energy crisis of early 2000s, when, of course, natural gas, electricity prices went absolutely through the roof. Let me first say what I'm going to talk about all relates to my role at the county at the time, managing internal energy matters. And I'll start with an example of how local governments were reacting. In 2002, when energy prices went through the roof, and a county that shall remain unnamed went ahead and fired their energy manager because their energy budget was so high. And that was the level of thinking about energy with a lot of local governments back then. I saw a lot of it in 08 as well, where the resources to manage energy were lumped in with all other government services that needed to take a haircut, right, to help survive. And the logic in that just always struck me as wrong-headed, because what we do in reducing energy costs can help our budgets. I mean, utility bills are always going to be paid by local governments. They're not going to not pay their bills. And maintaining people on staff who, number one, know what utilities are going to be, whereas most people, a lot of agencies, don't even know what their utility budgets are going to be from year to year. So maintaining people that know how to manage utilities and then reduce utility costs are actually the best way to help in their roles on these budget reductions. And I'm already seeing it today. I've read of several local governments already furloughing or laying off energy sustainability staff. And it just, I hate to see a lot of the same mistakes happening, but hopefully with as much as the industry has changed, that it won't be as common as in the past.
That's right. Yep. Yeah, and some local governments see it as a discretionary cut. That might be easier than, say, cutting public safety or public health at this point in time, but perhaps a short-sighted cut.
Yeah, so that's what I saw happening around me in 08 and 02. I'm happy to say that because of the way the county was set up from an energy standpoint in 08, we were actually not impacted. We actually grew our organization, and you and I were part of those discussions.
So was the fallout pretty big for LA County? Were pink slips already being handed out?
So yeah, in the rest of the county, LA County, there are already talks of furloughs and layoffs and hiring freezes and budget cuts and the like. Yeah. Why the energy organization in LA County is typically not impacted is because, go back to my statement that utility bills are going to be paid, right? Somebody has to pay them. So the way governments can insulate themselves from being part of just, routine budget cuts is to centralize their energy management organizations to include collecting all the bills from the utilities, paying all the bills from the utilities, and if necessary, rebill internal organizations so that you can collect the payments from them for the utility bills. That all should be centralized anyway. Hopefully nobody is back in the days of, 1,000 different organizations collecting the bills and paying them, and nobody knows, right, what their total utilities are. But once you centralize it, and I think the county might have been the first to do this, and it wasn't me, it was already in place. You build a staff, and you make that staff part of the utility budget through a surcharge on the utility bills. So, we charged a 3% surcharge to fund all of our staff and other resources and services, consultants and whatnot, on top of the utility bills that we charged all the internal customers. And then, like I said, nobody knows what your bill is going to be from billing cycle to billing cycle anyway. So if there's a 3% overhead on there to pay for these services, it's transparent. It's transparent. And then the onus is on the organization to show their value so that overhead charge isn't questioned or it isn't cut. So that's what we did, is we showed value. These departments, they didn't have to pay the 3% overhead. They could have denied it and pay their own bills and whatnot. But we retained every single department as an overhead customer because we showed value. And I know
so it wasn't necessarily calculated based on a percentage of energy savings. It was just a surcharge on top of whatever their bill happened to be.
Exactly. And
what did you call that? Did it have a name?
It was, we were the utilities budget. And so the budget consisted, right, 95% of the bills themselves, and then the overhead and some other consulting services and regulatory and things like that. So we were 3% on a $200 million a year utility budget. So in essence, that's how our organization survived. I've seen other local governments in California that charge a 10% overhead, and everything was fine, and they were doing great work. And I've had other local governments tell me, well, we're so small, how could we possibly do that? And I say, get together with other smaller cities or counties and do it as a group.
So administering it on a regional basis.
Yeah, that boggles the minds of a lot of typical administrators, right? That local governments would work together like that. But in our space, we proved that it can be done.
So you were able to use those. I'm sorry, you were able to use those funds then you recirculated it, you were able to retain both staffing and consulting in-house without having to take additional budget appropriation every year, right? So that was just a one-time decision that you had the Board of Supervisors make at LA County to add that surcharge, and then it just continued, right?
Yeah, so our department, some guy in our department before I got there actually thought, hey, this would be a good idea. At the time, there were Edison programs that were very generous in providing funding for demand reductions. And so somebody proposed this structure to begin to do projects and acquire those really good incentives from Edison, and presented it to the board, and the board said this is a no-brainer, and there it went. So every year that surcharge, I was there 17 years. That surcharge was there 17 years, and it's still there as far as I know now.
But it wasn't something that would be on the chopping block in the case of a tough budget year.
Right. I mean, the county could have said, hey, departments, we're going to cut your utility budgets too. You figure out how to manage that. But again, it goes back to showing value. The county still has funds that they're using to do projects, and it's reducing the utilities budget.
So at the time, I remember learning about what you were doing, and you were able to, as the general manager of the County of Los Angeles's Office of Sustainability, you were able to continue those programs without much concern and then grow from there. I think it's still fairly unique. I don't see a lot of local governments using a surcharge like this. So this is something we wanted to present to local governments, because now's another time where folks are going to be facing budget cuts, and this is something that isn't necessarily immune to economic fallout, but could help you sustain some programs and save some money internally in terms of operating costs while we're going through these tough times.
That would be my primary message about surviving tough times. Get your business organized in such a way that you can be primarily immune from these cuts, and then show that you provide value as well as savings to your organization.
Right.
I won't even say that.
So you rode the wave of 2009. I actually ended up with a pink slip. I was last in at the time. I was at the planning department when I first joined the County of Santa Barbara, and so I was going to be the first one back out if they had to make cuts. So I received a pink slip, but ended up getting sort of rescued and being part of the process to assist with recovery coordination. And part of that was going out and getting other dollars, and part of that was to continue on our energy programs that were being designed. And I was fortunate at the time to work under leadership that was really interested in propelling these things forward. So survived and moved into a different department, and we got some additional dollars. So let's change our focus then from just saving operating dollars and trying to find internal revenue to looking outward. And how do you create a foundation to go out and seek this external funding? So there was a perfect storm in our case in 2009. I use that term a lot, I remember, where there was federal stimulus that had come down as a result of the recession, and huge federal interest that was starting to build in terms of building energy retrofits. There was a report that came out from the White House called Retrofit to Recovery that everybody hung their hat on, and that was the hot thing. So simultaneously, there were moves happening in California on the building efficiency front. So can you tell our audience a little bit more about those opportunities and how you felt like you prepared your county specifically to take advantage of them?
Yeah, so I agree with you. The ERA stimulus funding was, really once in a career type of opportunity. And again, I go back to, because we had an organization in place that could, put a coherent strategy in place to go after that money. The county did exceptionally well. We received a lot of money in those days. And again, I base it on that we had an organization, we had resource, and we had a track record. The things that we did differently there were we proposed to go after programs that now went outside municipal operations. So we went into we went and proposed private sector programs. That was number one, I think, important thing that we did, because it wasn't being provided by any other local government, right? No local government was doing energy work in the private sector, except for a municipal utility. It was the domain of the investor-owned utility. We thought that local government could get in that space, as did you. Number two, we decided to make it a regional program, a program not just for county unincorporated area, which is all we were supposedly responsible for. We said, well, we're going to work with, other jurisdictions in the county. And so we proposed programs that could cover not just LA County unincorporated, but other cities in the county. And the third, I think, important thing we did was we proposed to work with the state's programs, the investor or the Public Utility Commission programs that were being rolled out at the same time, right? Energy Upgrade California and the whole retrofit movement. We said we're going to work in conjunction with Edison and the gas company on that. So it just made more sense than trying to go out and replace a lot of light bulbs in county buildings. And I'm not downplaying the need for that or organizations that did that. It was just, like I said, a once in a career opportunity to really do something that I felt could be maintained even after the grant funds.
Yeah, well, and even before the recession really hit, there was a lot of talk of underemployment in the contracting world,
right?
The construction industry. So they were taking a hit already. So the beauty of what we were doing and trying to have these scalable programs that were going to encourage private sector participation in the market and in new ways was that we were really building jobs. And so that was an attractive concept for decision makers at the policy level. So you could tie together these, this urgent issue with energy savings and trying to do something to address climate change with some interest in building up your local economy.
Right.
And so, yeah, at the time it was energy efficiency that was the hot word on the street, or retrofits were the hot word on the street. This time it's a little different, right? Energy efficiency might not be quite as much of the hot new topic. I'm hearing things more like resilience and decarbonization as things that people hope to see funded, although energy efficiency being part of the overall decarbonization conversation, especially as we start here in California to confront wildfire season. So what do you see as being potential places where the urgency of needing to mitigate climate change meets with economic stimulus?
The issue areas you mentioned are there's a lot of interest there and there's a lot of need for it. The other one, I think, where governments have tremendous opportunity is in grid modernization. I think that's and that sort of goes in parallel with what you've described. I think especially with the grid, a lot of projects are going to be funded through deferring grid upgrades and grid projects. That's already happening in the state. There won't be any more fossil fuel power plants built. They're eventually going to shut down. Those resources, whether it's the power supply or the grid stability they provide, those resources are needed. And instead of having the IOU grid operators spend billions of dollars on building stuff or upgrading their systems, they're going to look for DERs to provide the same benefits, local DERs. And it's already happening with it. We've seen solicitations out. And this is where I think local governments really have an opportunity to take at least a partner role with the private sector or a lead role. And now I want to throw the CCAs into it too, because the CCAs play a huge role in this. And so these are local governments now who have funds, who have revenues, and they've got regulatory freedom to do a lot of things that that we weren't allowed to do before there were a lot of CCAs. So there's a couple of sources of revenues, and I'll also say financing should be utilized a heck of a lot more. Where it's cost effective, there's no reason a lot of these projects couldn't be financed. And so a lot of these resources, whether it's CCA, grid resources, grants, financing, private sector capital, right? Like the PACE programs are an example of getting the private sector involved. There's a lot of revenue, there's a lot of funding sources out there in addition to the grants, right? The one in 4 winners in the entire state type of grants. The grants are great. They help stimulate a lot of innovation, but to really transform the state, we need more than just grants.
Yeah, and actually, those are good points, and maybe we should get a little more specific about the dollars that we received under ARA. Just to make it clear, they were somewhat sparse. We were fortunate. We got over $2 million out of the Department of Energy's EECBG program at the time, which was codified by law but never appropriated until the recession hit, until the ARA stimulus package funded it. And you got more than that, but millions of dollars, and we're partnering with the Bay Area at the time to do that. And so we were really the 2 big grants that happened for the state of California, but they were multi-year. And they really set the foundation. In my opinion, they are a good demonstration of how you can go from a program that is conceptual. Ours were both incorporating energy efficiency financing. They were at the conceptual level. They were focused actually on PACE originally, and then changed course a little bit as PACE struggled. But it did set the foundation for programs that were focused community facing, and allowed us to grow from there. Right? Would you characterize things that way, that it built a foundation for you to grow from?
Oh, absolutely. Not only did it build a foundation experience-wise and establish programs that are still operating today, it led to acquiring different funding from different sources to continue those programs. And I just want to talk a little bit about PACE, because it's actually LA County had just announced this week they dropped their PACE program. Wow. Yeah. So rightly or wrongly, PACE was an example of taking a little bit of stimulus funds and creating a program that drove private sector capital right into the marketplace. The county program, before they terminated it this week, as a matter of fact, we generated $1.5 billion in residential retrofit projects. Wow. And okay, maybe there were a handful of bad contractors and a handful of bad news articles, and there were other issues with PACE, but it's an example of taking a little bit of funding to create a credit reserve and allow, I think we had 35 to 40,000 residential projects that were PACE financed at whatever, $30,000 per project, right? That's well over $1 billion in economic, right, business.
Right. That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, that was always the idea, to leverage. That was the big word, leverage a little bit of stimulus dollars and actually create stimulus, which did occur, not only through the EECB, so Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant, but then also through state energy program as well, where some other funds were administered through.
So the other example of what we did that created, another pathway for longevity of these programs was part of what we created with the stimulus program led to the development of the regional energy networks.
That's
right. We were doing REN work before there were RENs. We were doing REN work with the stimulus funds, regional networking, and so we proved that we as local governments could run these regional programs. You did, we did, up in Bay Area did. So that was another outcome of those stimulus days.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because that didn't just happen out of the blue. That took a lot of groundwork by local governments working through the regulatory process and demonstrating some results. And so I remember, trying to build off of ARA. We have this foundation. These funds are not going to last forever, but now we can go out and try to explore opportunities to sustain these programs. Cue in trying to work with the CPUC, where they had a sudden interest in the financing models that we were developing. So the loan loss reserve model, that was of interest for a couple of years. And so they ended up creating a separate ARA financing mechanism to continue the ARA programs for a few more years. And then you in the Bay Area took advantage of the opportunity to then pitch the regional energy network concept, I think through LGSEC, correct?
Yeah, LGSEC, I believe we selected as the organization to submit the filing, the initial plea. I forget the exact terminology, but right out of the blue, we submitted something that said, hey, we think this is a good idea. Yeah.
I mean, the point being that it isn't always, you don't sit back and wait for solicitations necessarily. You've got to be sort of prepared for them when they come, and then there's work to be done perhaps at the state level to try to influence maybe a budgetary process to allocate additional funds. And not every local government has the resources or means to do that.
Yeah, so I know probably later on in this conversation, yes, that's a point I really want to embellish a little bit about thinking a little bit ahead about before just responding to a grant opportunity.
Yeah. But I can speak personally. Had the county that I was working for at the time not been ready and prepared when our opportunities arose. The things that we have today, we have a sustainability division, we have some continued programs. It may not exist today. I don't know how things would have fallen out, but that certainly gave us a huge leg up in accelerating the establishment of those programs. And it could have gone the other way. We could have lost all the people that were working on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, I was able to keep 3 or 4 people funded 100% on external funds for many years. And you were able to supplement what you were doing with the surcharge as well.
Yes.
So tell me, let's talk a little bit more about our audience, the folks that are going to be listening in, local government practitioners that may be concerned about what's to come in the next year or so. How can they prepare themselves for what may be coming down the pike? Maybe it's from federal stimulus opportunities, maybe it's other opportunities on the horizon. So how can they prepare themselves to both save internally and thrive and build these programs that might have a chance at lasting?
Yeah, so if because of this crisis, the federal government, the state government, locals want to create another once in a career opportunity, then a lot of what we've been talking about needs to be, those discussions need to be happening now, right? Number one, create your central organization, your energy organization with a annual funding, just so you have people to think about these things. Then the other thing I'd stress is talk with others in your region. think regionally. I've been saying this the whole time I was at the county. Think regionally in doing stuff with others. If you're a city or a county, and there may be this once in a career type funding coming out, start thinking about things that you'd want to do. And I say, work with CCAs. I'm very heartened to see that a lot of CCAs up north are starting to work with BayREN. They're working with some of the partnerships, that's the existing partnerships now, local governments. So I think there's a lot of the CCAs don't know the history that local governments have had, right, with the PUC, the CC, and the state, and the IOUs, and all the things we tried to do. But I see some of them now starting to work collaboratively with those of us who fought all these battles and still have some things we wanted to do. So I would say work with the CCAs as well. Understand where the other revenue opportunities are. And again, I can't emphasize enough that modernization of the grid and deferral or retirement of these fossil fuel and nuclear plants, all the resources are going to be replaced with DERs, and the funds will be there, right? Wherever PG&E was purchasing power from Palo Verde or Diablo, and Diablo was supplying grid reliability. Those, what they were paying for that is they're going to pay the same amount or more for DERs to get installed. And again, these are locational. And who should care most about power stability and grid stability in your region than the local governments? So there are a number of proceedings ongoing at the PUC right now related to all of this. And I think people should be strategizing on, hey, if there's going to be grant money, let's go after it with a really solid local, regional plan that addresses some of the issues that the state is facing right now. And you mentioned it, the power shutoffs, the safety shutoffs, resiliency, microgrids, solar plus storage, locationally. Those are all what the state is wrestling with right now. Doing this for the benefit of disadvantaged communities. So yeah, I'd start planning for all of this. If you got a big pot of money thrown your way or a revenue opportunity, what would you do with it? I wouldn't wait until the solicitation comes out. I'd start planning it now. And then the regulatory folks, they want to hear from local governments. This is what I learned very early on. The PUC, the CEC, CARB, they want to hear from local governments because, back when we got into this, they never heard from us. Very rarely did they hear from local governments. So develop your coalitions and go speak to the regulatory bodies, but show that you're coordinated, right? Show that you're working as a group, and then talk to the legislature as well.
Yeah. Some of this requires a little bit of a crystal ball in terms of trying to predict what will come from what funding streams and what the criteria will be. Overall, these proposals are typically a lot of work, but your policymakers, your decision makers out there will be appreciative if you can find a way to offload some staffing costs for a period of time with some external funding. That will help you tremendously in the next budget cycle.
Here, I'll give you one specific example of a very small Western High Sierras County that has a fire mitigation problem, right? They've gone through the fires, so there's a bunch of dead trees around that need to be gotten rid of. And then, you know, the forests have to be thinned out for fire purposes as well. So, and I mentioned this, well, they went after a grant, a CEC grant, to assess the development of a biomass plant to incinerate all these trees with no emissions, and sell that power to PG&E under their subsidized biomat tariff. And lo and behold, they got a grant to develop the project. They were awarded the grant. They developed the project, and it's very close to going into operation. And that plant's going to operate for 20 plus years. And so there's a perfect example of having a really good plan for to go after a grant when the opportunity arises, and then propose something that is going to sustain itself for a number of years and be a revenue generator for the community and mitigate a local problem.
That's right. And, you know, if it puts itself out of business eventually because it solved a problem, great.
You know, depending on how it goes, well, I know for a fact they're already talking about getting ready for another one. So again, that's just an example. There's one other opportunity that I think opens windows for local governments to get more information. That's the issue of data, right? For years, we fought data battles at the Public Utility Commission. We as local governments, right? We don't want the data for what Google and Amazon wants it for. We want it, right? Because we're policymakers. Well, lo and behold, we never could get the data, but now who has all the data, right, as CCAs? Local governments are on all the boards of the CCAs. They have all interval meter data for all their customers, right? 95% of the meters in the CCA territory have stayed with the CCA. So now being able to have that type of data for every account and then potentially combining it as the Energy Atlas did with all kinds of other publicly available parcel and building information. Now think of the analysis you could do about what your building, you know, needs are in your territory, in your community. It just opens up. It opens up opportunities that are just, you know, mind-boggling to think about.
Yeah,
so much data.
The huge energy landscape difference now compared to 10 years ago is the presence of the CCAs and being able to work with them. So for local governments that aren't administering a CCA, you know, we're trying to think about what are their opportunities to take advantage of anything that comes as a result of this economic fallout or just anything else that might exist. And there's plenty of things that already exist that they could or should be tracking, things like you know, the EPIC grant or some ratepayer funded things that are already, you know, California is somewhat lucky that it shifts ratepayer dollars into things that local governments could actually take advantage of, like the EPIC program administered by the California Energy Commission, or recently there's been a huge influx in money for the self-generation incentive program that's primarily focused on disadvantaged communities, but that's incentives for storage and energy resilience. And then of course California has cap and trade revenue dollars that is sort of sustainable. It comes as an annual revenue stream every year. However, we're hearing that that's going to take a hit as fuel demand has decreased in recession. So, but those are some places to look already. And then otherwise, the federal stimulus are worth tracking. Those will flow in some ways through through California. So plenty of folks are checking out the May revise, the California budget, and then looking at how California will flow those funds through. And so it's worth tracking. And in the case that stimulus dollars potentially do come through, things that are potentially shovel ready, have a huge opportunity for scale, and have an opportunity for economic stimulus. My guess will be, like the last time, we'll be at the front of the pack.
Yeah, the grants, I've always felt like maybe there's an opportunity for local governments to speak with the legislature or the regulators and try to figure out a new formula for these grants, so they're not just a handful of winners and everybody else loses. And again, local governments have so much more clout now because of CCAs. So I can't stress enough that they should be working with the CCAs, and quite honestly, I think the CCA track record is proven well enough now that every jurisdiction should be investigating it. And I do a lot of work now in the CCA space, especially CCA development, and there are different opportunities now for developing a CCA. It is the same model that has been followed for 10 plus years. That's transitioning. So an example of a region that is doing just about everything that could be done for the region, and you would think because of where they're at, it would be hard for them to get anything done, and that's Redwood Coast, right? But look at the Redwood Coast organization. They started out as an energy JPA, right? The Regional Energy Authority. Then they took advantage and got a PG&E local government partnership. Then I think they ran some other energy programs, got some funding where they could, because they're in an area that doesn't get a lot of attention. Then they went for the CCA. Now I believe they're at least contemplating participating as a RED. And the thing that's unique is it's all done under that one organization. All of that is done under the one organization. And oh, by the way, they are designing a microgrid now for their airport, and it's being administered under the JPA. So, boy, to me, that's what it should look like for all regions.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a longer conversation to talk about all the potential opportunities and all the different funding streams that could potentially come in and help folks in California grow their energy programs. But that was excellent, and thank you so much for giving some good advice to folks that are listening in. Is there anything final you want to tell folks in terms of suggestions for things that might be more cost neutral right now during crisis, that are climate smart strategies, or just any other ways? How can they thrive in tough times like we had to a decade ago?
So I would say, just right off the bat, short term, you want to show value for what you're doing and maybe survive these tough times. Develop a conservation program, right? Either in your own municipal buildings or maybe in your community. It's just municipal buildings, let's say. Okay, times are going to be tough. What's the easiest, fastest thing you can do to help with the budgets? Develop a really heavy-duty conservation program to help lower your utility bills. I mean, that's like, okay, let me keep my job, and I'll do it by just walking around turning off lights that are on. I mean, I've some folks have reached out to me, and I said that's the number one thing, the easiest thing you can do, justify yourself and help the budget. Develop conservation. All areas: electricity, natural gas, fuels, right? Water. So that'd be the easiest thing, piece of advice I could give, if you don't really have anything else to go off of.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much, Howard. It was so nice to talk to you about all this, reminisce, and then think a little bit about the future, which is what we like to do when we usually get together and talk. So
yeah, and I hope that that some sort of function of your statewide energy efficiency coordinator role can survive through a lot of this change, because I've suggested that local governments need to speak with each other and coordinate more, and yours was a function that absolutely provided that and promoted it. So got to figure out another way we can get together.
I didn't even pay you to say that. But yeah, thank you. And I think the local government commission and the other NGOs that are working on all this are really committed to the goals of keeping local governments connected and sharing best practices and things like that. So I do want to say thanks again for sharing your experience and your advice and your time with us. And thanks to our listeners. Thank you for spending some time with us. We hope this conversation has inspired you to think about how you can innovate and thrive in a very difficult time. So, what programs and policies do you have in maybe early development that could be turned into a great proposal that can help create some economic opportunity for your community? So to access other capacity and knowledge building resources or make a technical assistance request, please feel free to visit the eecoordinator.info website, which is where you can reach me and resources that were developed before my time. And until next time, I just wish you good health. Please stay safe and well. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.